Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is useful human Arif Hassan, a big, bright ball of sunshine. Arif, how are you doing today?
I am doing awful. I'm terrible. I'm having the worst time. How are you?
I am less complainy than you, but still bad. So I feel like we're going into this with the right energy. As far as recapping a terrible loss to the Packers, not terrible in terms of the score, just in the futility of life itself. So we'll be talking about that here in just a moment. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for listening, for sharing the links to the shows, for donating to the show to help keep the lights on. Again, thank you guys so much. Really do appreciate it. If you would like to donate to the show, if you hear value in what we present, you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode, and you can donate to the show. You can give in any amount you'd like. Patreon is more of a subscriber base, much like an NPR pledge drive. So people like $1 a month, $3.50 a month to help keep Loch Ness Monster at bay, stuff like that. We are actually going to be doing a promotion starting, I believe, next week, involving a little bit of fundraising for the Seattle show. So if you're interested in that, pay attention to what we're going to be doing next week. As far as that goes, we have some swag from the New York show that I'll be sending out, and we will be announcing that next week when I have more details and once I've actually told Arif about what we're doing. So we'll be doing that.
I'm excited to hear about that.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll be doing that next week. So pay attention to that. But again, if you'd like to donate to the show, you can do that at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, and you can donate there. So all of that aside, let's not go into the Packers game because I don't really feel like talking about the Packers game. Instead, we can talk about Matt Prater and Adam Vinatieri.
Oh, that's two random kickers to bring up. I don't know why you would bring up random kickers, James.
I don't know why I would bring up Matt Prater and Adam Vinatieri. I mean, they're both good kickers.
Historically, yes.
Historically, yes, except that Adam Vinatieri appears to have a nasty case of the yips. And Matt Prater managed to miss an extra point. This
is that?
week.
I mean, Detroit still won. So why would you be upset that he missed an extra point, James?
Because it meant that I lost to you in fantasy.
Because I find that claim very interesting because you lose 25 points because of that, and yet I would have still crushed you if you'd gotten 50 more points. That's very interesting, James.
This wasn't a good week for me.
You decided, like an idiot, to play fullback O.J. Howard at the tight end position. I can't believe you. He's clearly a lead blocker. And then you played Drew Brees, knowing that Teddy Bridgewater was waiting in the wings. You decide to play Drew Brees.
Yeah,
you moron. You utter nincompoop.
I've made poor life choices, and I am dealing with them. So there are two. God, that might as well be the name of my autobiography, quite frankly. So there's two Norse Code leagues, and I have Matt Prater in both of them because Matt Prater is ridiculously reliable. And I ended up losing both games as a result. Well, I ended up losing the game against you because, well, it's, I was just getting trounced. Yeah, a lot of terrible things happened there. But I did, in fact, lose the other one because of the kick. So I was real pleased when I saw that happened.
You have to distribute your risk. I mean, I chose a pair of very reliable kickers. In the league where I played you, I picked the most reliable kicker I could think of, Daniel Carlson. So
you're going to cruise to the championship on Daniel Carlson's foot, and I am going to be full of so much rage.
You just got to – I'm just going where the stats tell me, and Daniel Carlson was so reliable last year. I couldn't see him not leading my team to a championship this year.
Who's the Dolphins kicker? Because I'm looking that up right now because he needs to be my kicker now because he's not getting on the field.
Because he's not going to kick any extra points. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I think
that's a strategy.
I think it's Jason Sanders. I think is the starting kicker for. I could be wrong, but Google says it's Jason Sanders, so I'm going to go with that. So Yeah, I need to have him be my kicker because there's just no way he's going to get an extra point in. This is a good idea. Adam Vinatieri, however, missed 2, and he was drafted in one of the leagues, and boy, that I don't think he scored more than 16 points. That's a rough way to go, son. That's too bad. Jesse from New York had Adam on his team. He was like, oh, dude.
Yeah, the net
rough.
points that Adam Vinatieri has scored this year in the Norse Code Fantasy League is negative 69.
That's the opposite of nice, as it turns out.
Negative nice.
Negative. There's a negative amount of nice going on there. Okay, so enough about fantasy, which we're only bothering you about, or we're only telling you about it rather because it involves the kicking aspect of things. Otherwise, listening to other people's fantasy teams tends to be incredibly annoying. So we just want to tell you about the good stuff here, which means we have to talk about the Packers game. And the first thing that we can talk about involving the Packers game is the fact that it would appear, I could be wrong, but it could appear that when the game is in scripted mode for the offense, where they script out the first 20, 30 plays or whatever, that the Mike Zimmer defense cannot handle that. But as soon as they are done with their script, the Vikings defense is scary as hell. Is there a reason why the scripted portion of the game tends to go so poorly for the Vikings?
Yeah, so that's kind of like an interesting observation, because I remember dealing with kind of this observation last year, and I even wrote a piece at The Athletic. It was like something to do with like five myths or something dealing with the Vikings, and one of them was about this question about, is it the case that, the Vikings defense is, vulnerable to scripted plays? And I don't actually think that's really the case, because the complaint last year was the opposite. Because I remember people saying that Mike Zimmer's poor at defensive halftime adjustments, that teams were scoring more in the third quarter than they were in the first or second quarter. And so I think this is just kind of a thing that's happened the past 2 weeks, that just it feels like it's the case. On average, the Vikings defense over the years has been better in the second half than the first half, which maybe kind of implies that scripted plays are a problem. But in 2018, it was the other way around, or 2017, it was the other way around. 2018, people thought it was one way, and actually it was another way. So I think that there's this feeling that it's the case, and I don't think it's actually true. A lot of people kind of remember the beginning of, like, let's say the LA game or the Buffalo game, or the beginning, obviously, of this Packers game, and they say, hey, the Vikings have been really poor against scripted plays. What's going on? Are they entirely reliant on halftime adjustments? And when I wrote this piece, someone in the comments was like, well, that's my criticism of Zimmer, is that he's entirely reliant on halftime adjustments. And it's like, well, pick what you think, because, we say one thing and then a year later we forget that we said it and we say the opposite. So I don't actually think that the Vikings have an inherent weakness against scripted plays. Last year, people thought it was that the Vikings were very good against that, and then as teams adjusted to the Vikings, they ended up kind of losing out. So really, just kind of what happened here is that the Vikings were in just a poor setup. I mean, that first pass, the 39-yard play action pass to Davante Adams, that's not really anyone's fault. I mean, like, Xavier Rhodes and Harrison Smith are in coverage on that side of the field. There's it looks like a coverage confusion. They're clearly in zone on that half of the field where Rhodes is, covering not the flat, because there is a buzzing defender to the flat, but an underneath zone in what looks like kind of a cover two, and Harrison Smith is covering on top, and Adams just kind of slips in there. And after the game, someone's like, hey, Rhodes, what happened on that first play? And, he says he thought they were going to run a different route, which, whatever, that's fine. That happens all the time. So, okay, that first play, 39 yards, not really anyone's, it's a coverage confusion. I don't think that's a product of a scripted play. Next play, Davante Adams gets 21 yards. That's just because he's better than Jaron Kearse. Like, that's not a shock. And then, like, the fact that Geronimo Allison beat Nate Metters in the end zone, Well, there's no way that's a product of scripted plays. That's a product of Nate Metters being a backup safety being forced to play corner. So, who's on the practice squad earlier that week. So, I don't think that there's an issue with scripted plays. It just certainly seems like it, right? Because first 3 possessions, the Packers go 3 for 3 on third down. Rodgers, I think, has like over 8 yards an attempt. The running game is 4.7 yards per carry. And they score 3 touchdowns and 3 drives, right? And then after that, the Vikings allow 0 points. They allow the Packers to be 2 for 14 on third downs. They hold Rodgers to 3.1 yards per attempt and hold the running game to 3.9 yards per carry. And so it definitely feels like the defense just kind of figured it out and moved. But that's like such an extreme that like there's no way it's just a halftime adjustment that gets you from 8 yards an attempt to 3.1. A lot of things have to be different. And there were like adjustments that were made. It looked like they moved into match zone a little bit more often than pure man or pure zone. The Vikings do like match zone, so that's not a huge surprise that they were able to go into that pretty quickly. But there wasn't like a huge coverage adjustment that I saw that really changed the tenor of things. They did cover 2, cover 1, cover 3 in those first 3 possessions, and obviously that didn't work out. And then they did a bunch of cover 2, cover 4, cover 3 moving forward. So I think a lot of it was just these pattern match concepts that prevented pick plays and stuff like that from happening and allowed players to play man in their zones. So a lot of defensive adjustments, but I don't think they're inherently vulnerable to opening drives because in the past, people have claimed that they were, and in the past people have claimed that they weren't, and they weren't. And so it's just, I think, just kind of an anomaly. I think the Vikings defense was just out of sorts at the beginning of the game. That happens to coincide with when scripted plays occur. There was an excellent script portion of the script where they had a swing route to one running back with 2 blockers and a screen pass to the other running back. And they throw the swing pass first. And they don't get very much yardage on it. And then they throw the screen pass second or a couple plays later. But then they throw the screen pass on the same play and they get a touchdown off of it. That's just really excellent, play sequencing and execution. Really good stuff, and that's part of the script. But I don't think that that's like the Vikings are vulnerable to scripted plays as a result. So, maybe it's something to keep, pay attention to and keep watch. But it's not something I think is going to be a problem, even though I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I don't think it's going to be a problem going forward.
It was quite the pile-on. And if you would have asked me right after the score became 21-0, what the Packers' total was going to be by the end of the game, I would have said at least double that.
Right. And it felt like the game was just so out of hand. Rodgers had finally figured it out after struggling for 2.5 years. Nope. He just got back to struggling. So we're going to spend the beginning portion of this recap on the defense because it's going to involve less cursing than when we discuss the offense. So let's stick with the defense for just a little bit. What happened exactly after the second quarter started? Because the Vikings were able to figure it out, and Harrison Smith became the most dangerous man on the field. In his hits, and seemed to be everywhere, whether he was harassing Rodgers or whether he was, again, crowd surfing people out of bounds. Right, yeah. Obviously really good play. Some of it was that they were sticking to their tackles. They were just making tackles that they had missed in the first quarter. And if they missed a tackle, it was still kind of a positive impact on the play. One example, Anthony Barr shoots a gap, hits Aaron Jones, would be like a 4-yard loss, but Jones stiff arms him. So it's recorded as a missed tackle for Barr, but he forces Jones out of his running path and he has to arc all the way around. And he ends up getting tackled for like a 1-yard loss instead of a 4-yard loss, right? So even those missed tackles ended up turning into gains. But they tackled well instead of missing tackles, right? And so that's not an adjustment. That's not anything different. They just played better in that phase. But also, they were able to get to their landmarks quicker. Like I said, they played, pattern matching, which for those unfamiliar, pattern matching means you combine zone and man concepts, and you use the reads that you have on what are called the number 1, number 2, number 3 receivers, and that's determined by the order they have coming from the line of scrimmage. So the outermost receiver is the first one. Then inside of that is the number 2 receiver. And then inside of that is the number 3 receiver. And so based off of your assignment, your assignment could be, so like an outside corner will read the number 2. And if the number 2 cuts inside, then that's they don't have to worry about that. If the number 2 goes vertical, then they've got to carry the number 2 all the way up the field. Otherwise, they've probably got the number 1 unless the number 1 cuts inside. And so there's a bunch of rules for, the slot corner, the linebacker, the outside corner, etc., that allows them to play man coverage, but do it in a way that assigns it based off of what zone you're in. So when a receiver enters your zone, you play them like it's man coverage and follow the receiver instead of keeping your eyes on the quarterback. And that's something they did a lot more of as the game went on. So that's one adjustment they made, but I don't think they changed the coverage shell. They what they did do a lot at the beginning was man blitzes. So they would blitz with cover 1 and man coverage in the back. But that I don't think was so prominent that you could say that was the reason that they did so poorly at the beginning. They mixed up the coverage shells. They had some cover 4 looks, some cover 3 looks. But for the most part, I mean, I think the adjustments were to change the coverage from pure man or pure zone, or even the half man, half zone, where you've got zone on one side and man on the other, into kind of a more pattern matching look. It's a little bit more difficult to read. Rodgers has seen it a lot because the Vikings have played it a lot against him. So it's not as if he's like completely, blind to it. And one of the weaknesses of this is it tends to be crossing routes, which, the Packers did do a little bit of damage on crossing routes. But for the most part, they were able to shut it down. There's a lot of pressure, especially from Everson Griffin, who really just had this standout game. I think in the podcast I recorded immediately after the game with Chad Graff over at The Athletic, that's the Straight Cash podcast, I mentioned that I thought Everson Griffin might have had 10 pressures, just like Danielle Hunter had 10 pressures week 1 against Atlanta. And it turns out even better, he had 11 pressures, one sack, a couple of quarterback hits, and mostly just hurries because Rodgers does a very good job getting rid of the ball. So really great, phenomenal game from Everson Griffin, just the kind of stuff that we're used to seeing from him back in 2017. And that's what I said week 1, too, that he kind of looked like his 2017 self when he was getting a sack a game. He looks a lot like that, and I don't want to exaggerate it. Like, there's a lot of positive performances from the Vikings these past 2 weeks where it's very easy to get hyperbolic and say, Harrison Smith looks like the best safety in the NFL again, right? I mean, he's just coming off of a down year. Is that really the case? Maybe. Anthony Harris looks like he could be even better. That's asking a lot. He was the best safety in the NFL 2 years ago. Are you sure? That's pretty hyperbolic. Everson Griffin looks like he was when he was averaging a sack a game at the beginning of 2017 on the way not just to an all-pro season, but a record season. Wow, that's saying quite a bit. Danielle Hunter is the best under 25 pass rusher the NFL maybe has ever seen. You're saying a lot, dude. Like, it's easy to talk about some of these defensive performances in ways that seem obscenely out of control. You're like, wow, he's playing at a Hall of Fame level. It's like, you're talking about a lot of players that way. How many Hall of Fame players can you say are on the same team and they're 1-1, right? Like, it's tough. But honestly, I think that if you take a look at someone like Danielle Hunter or Everson Griffin or Harrison Smith or Anthony Harris and take a look at their play, at least over 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks is a small sample. That could potentially possibly be the case. I don't know. But, if you just take a look at those 2 weeks, they're having just these remarkable performances. And Everson Griffin had a great one. Danielle Hunter played really well, especially against the run. He was monstrous in the run game. PFF gave him like an average grade. I'm curious about that. I disagree. I think he was just phenomenal in the run game. And he did a pretty good job getting pressure too. I think he had 4 or 5 pressures. One of them, that sack where he just consumed Rodgers. Anthony Barr, he had up and down game, some good positives, some bad negatives, which is a fairly typical Anthony Barr game, I suppose. But he had good on pressure and just needed to get off of his blocks better on the edge, especially at the beginning there. And he might have been held by Jimmy Graham in one of those outside runs, but they didn't call it, so he has to do a better job getting off of it. Xavier Rhodes, this is interesting. As the defense got better, Xavier Rhodes kind of got worse. It didn't end up mattering, obviously, 2 for 14 on like third down. But those first couple of receptions to Devontae Adams, a 39-yard reception, 21-yard reception, and then, I don't know, like an 8-yard reception, none of those are really on Rhodes. right? I already mentioned the first two. One of them was on Curse. One of them was probably on Harrison Smith, but it was a coverage confusion. And then the third one, it wasn't in Rhodes' zone. It was a pass to the line of scrimmage. Now, Rhodes goes up to make an open field tackle and misses, and so you could say that's on him, but it's not on his coverage, right? And so the first couple of Devontae Adams receptions, he was targeted like 10 times or something like that, not really on Rhodes. And then as time goes on, he has a lot more difficulty, especially on these crossers where he's just kind of behind. And Harrison Smith ends up, I'm not going to say cleaning up, because I think this is a situation where you ended up having kind of a cover 3, and Harrison Smith ends up being the one that's supposed to be in coverage on Devontae Adams. So I'm not going to say he covered up Rhodes on that play, but man, what an astounding play he had in Devontae Adams. Just incredible, which is part of the reason you can say he looks like his old self. So a lot of great defensive performances. Linval Joseph looked good, not kind of like his old self. But, we saw Hercules Madoff had like 7 snaps, and they were really good. I want to see what happens if he gets more snaps. I could see him getting blown up in the run game, so I'm not incredibly enthused. But, I mean, Shamar Stephen's not giving you a ton. But, yeah, there's a bunch of – Eric Kendricks is playing really well this year. And I thought he had a down year last year. So, really good to see Kendricks playing kind of like, when the Vikings drafted him in 2015, what they envisioned. So, really good defensive performances. Trey Waynes, up and down. Jaron Curse, I thought, played tremendously. He gives up that 21-yarder at the beginning. And then, they bench him for Nate Metters, and then Metters, gives up a touchdown, so they put Curse back in. And Curse plays, I think, tremendously after that. So, yeah, there's a lot to be excited about with that defense, despite the fact that they gave up 21 points real quick.
Yeah, and the thing that was really interesting to me was that Devontae Adams was basically a non-factor from the second quarter all the way to the final drive by the Packers to kill some clock. He basically became a non-factor at all.
Yeah, what did I say? He probably had something like 10 targets or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of those targets were early in those 3 possessions, but even on some of these targets that came later, I think he converted one more third down before we got to the final possession, where I think then he converted one more. And yeah, he got a good reception on Rhodes on a crosser and all that. But yeah, it seemed like he was a non-factor. A lot of that, I think, has to do with the confusing coverage principles the Vikings employed, just kind of generally. A lot of that has to do with pressure, although we're kind of told that pressure matters a lot less in general. But Rodgers was pressured almost as much as Kirk Cousins was, which, in a normal situation would just be tremendous. In this situation, you're just like, okay, great. Kirk Cousins was pressured 60% of the time, and Rodgers was pressured 51% of the time. It's extraordinary, right? 51% pressure rate is just incredible. And then you take a look at what happened to Cousins, and you're like, well, all right. But I think that the way they got rid of Devontae Adams was kind of multifaceted. I don't think they doubled him. I think that was kind of the first assumption that a lot of people would make when, Rodgers said they made a bunch of adjustments, that the Vikings made a bunch of adjustments that made it more difficult for him to complete passes. And then Zimmer says they made a bunch of adjustments after those first 3 drives. And my first thought is, oh, did they double Devontae Adams? And they kind of didn't. So I think it's really just those changes in coverage principles that kind of, I'm not going to say erased him from the game, but he ended up with 100 yards in the game, right? But 70 of them occurred in that first 3 drives, and he has 30 yards for the rest of the 3 quarters, and some of them occur in that final kill the clock drive. Effectively, not a factor after those first 3 possessions.
Yeah, and again, if he would have told me that he only ended up with about 100 yards, I would have been shocked, because it didn't make any sense. The Vikings weren't doing anything to stop him, so why would he be stopped?
Right, yeah.
It didn't make any sense there. And Everson Griffin did look amazing. And that sack that he had was just fantastic.
Great.
He looked like he was just trying to take Aaron Rodgers down as hard as he could without laying down on him.
Very aware of the rules.
Yes, if any team is aware of that particular rule, it's Minnesota. But that was really fun to watch, and the defense showed up. The defense was there for the team, and we can slowly but surely point our attention toward Dalvin Cook, who had a fantastic game.
Yeah, wow, what a game from Dalvin Cook.
Dalvin Cook, career game for him.
Well, 190 yards from scrimmage, something like that?
Something like that. And that 75-yard run I want to say save the game, even though the Vikings ended up losing. But realistically, that if he didn't break it there, if we didn't score on that drive, I don't think. I think the team kind of gives up.
If the Vikings end up scoring one of those final two drives, which obviously we're going to end up talking about it a bit later, we would point to that 75-yard touchdown as maybe like the turning point, right? Because from that point on, the only team that scores is the Vikings, right? And I'm not going to say they roll because 16 points over 3 quarters isn't really rolling, but they just kind of advance methodically, not on a consistent basis, but pretty well. And so after like these two, like Dalvin Cook has 132.5 yards per game, which, you could say, hey, in that that Falcons game, different bird, they ran the ball a lot to kill the clock. So of course Dalvin Cook's going to get a bunch of yards, but he got more yards rushing in this game and more yards overall in this game than he did in a game where they decided they were just going to run the ball forever. And so he ends up with one fewer rushing attempt, averages 7.7 yards per carry. And then when you throw in Alexander Madison, they end up averaging shockingly more over the course of the game. 154 yards on the ground, 37 in the air. So it looks like 191. I thought it was 36 in the air. So that's even better. Another touchdown for him. Just an incredible game. And the thing that sticks out is that he ends up generating 125 of his 154 rushing yards after contact, which is tremendous. Having only 29 of your yards available to you before contact is it's got to be frustrating on 20 carries, right? And you can say, hey, those 75 yards probably inflate the total, and that's fair, right? So let's we'll say those 75 yards, that carry never happens, right? So 19 carries for 74 yards? Yeah. Even if you take it away, his yards after contact is well above league average on those 19 carries. And so, he does a great job kind of forcing missed tackles. I think he had 7 forced missed tackles in the game, which understates kind of what his impact was. And the thing is, it's very easy to take a look at that stat line and say, wow, the offensive line must have blocked really well. And they must have been blocking well over the past 2 games for Dalvin Cook to be averaging 132.5 yards a game and to be averaging 6.5 yards per carry. And the thing is, they kind of didn't. I mean, Brian O'Neill did. He's great. And then Garrett Bradbury had some really great moments as a run blocker. But for the most part, they just kind of let, and Josh Klein was all right overall, but they just kind of let players into the backfield. Garrett Bradbury had highlights, but he also had lowlights as a run blocker. Dakota Dozier didn't play very well. Riley Reif as a run blocker is kind of whatever. And so they did end up letting a lot of players into the backfield. But despite that, Cook produced, averaged 7.7 yards per carry, and very meaningful yards. Like, they're not like he didn't run for 7 yards on 3rd and 8. Like, he ran for 11 yards on 1st and 10, kind of stuff. So really impactful, meaningful performance. You don't tend to see that in the run game. The run game ends up, I think, averaging more per carry than the passing game averages yards over the air. I know at some point in the game that was definitely true, kind of late into the 4th quarter. I don't know if that ended up being true at the end, but I suspect it was. And then also, I think more expected points, yes, definitely more expected points were produced on the ground than in the air, which again is also very rare. And expected points is a metric that looks at the down and distance at every point in the field and determines on average how often NFL teams score and how much they score at every position, at every down and distance across the field, and those are averaged out. And so it takes into account things like down and distance, like 1st and 10 at the 20 versus 3rd and 1 at the goal line or whatever, right? The expected points are different. And so the difference between, what your expected points are at the beginning of the play and at the end of the play are how many expected points you add. And very rarely is the running game positive, much less better than the passing game, because running tends to reduce your expected points. It's part of the sacrifice you make to have the game theory implications of being able to run the ball, whether or not you believe in them. But in this case, the Vikings just generated more points running the ball than they did passing. So really tremendous game from Dalvin Cook, who might be playing better than any other running back in the league.
Well, he definitely has more yards than anybody, according to NFL.com. So he is doing quite well for himself. And Madison had a great run, like one where he just didn't give up. And it was really nice to
it looked
see
like
him
he was going to
continue.
be. Yeah, it looked like he was going to be down after 4 yards, and he pushes through. And it looks like he's going to be down after 8 yards, and he pushes through. It looks like he's going to be down after 11 yards, and he ends up producing 14, well into the red zone. That was a great run. Overall, Madison had, not that he had a ton of carries, but on the carries that he had a pretty good game. Which, I mean, that's a great 1-2 punch to have, because I didn't really see Madison as anything more than a goal line guy. And I am not sure the Vikings saw him as anything more than a goal line guy, but we're seeing kind of some of the stuff that allowed him to be such a feature back at Boise State, that allowed him to play on every down at Boise State. The Vikings are using him like a relief back instead of just a power back. And he seems to be producing in that respect. So that's really good to see.
So welcome surprise for the Vikings to stumble upon a second string running back that is very much a potential first string if something were to happen to Dalvin. Like, he's good. It's refreshing to watch the way that he in my eyes anyway. When he was on that play, he had several times that he could have run out of bounds, or he could have tried to avoid contact, and he just went head down and barreled through. And it was really nice to, it was really refreshing to watch, like, oh, good. We really do have a standout rookie back that is a very good option for number 2.
Yeah, it's good to see.
So, what else can we distract ourselves with before we start talking about Kirk Cousins and the passing game? Well, let's talk about the offensive line as far as how they played in pass protection, because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't picked up, and it ended up putting Kirk into positions that he would have rather have not been in. And there was one play in particular that they called at least 3 times that it backfired all 3 times. And I'm pretty sure you know which one I'm talking about. The play action where all of a sudden there's a defender uncovered on the side that Kirk Cousins is already at. And he's like, well, crap.
Yeah, the naked boot is a difficult play to be confident in, because it removes the protection for the quarterback, and the point is that everyone is going to be attacking the running back, right? And, for the Vikings, that very often means kind of an outside zone, and the Packers were keying in on the outside zone. They were attacking that outside zone before the play developed. So it seems like play action is the way to go. And play action on an outside zone, you really want to roll the quarterback out, and you want to take that last offensive tackle with you away from the quarterback. Otherwise, you're just not going to sell it. And so, makes sense, but it didn't work. Dean Lowry in particular was great at kind of picking up what was happening, whether it was play action or a genuine run play, and he would just start chasing Cousins. That produced, a fair amount of pressure, but honestly, it's just the offensive line just couldn't stop pressure from appearing. Whether it was Bradbury versus Kenny Clark, Dakota Dozier versus Dean Lowry, the only offensive lineman who held up in pass protection on a consistent basis was Riley Reif, who, he was lined up against Darius Smith before Smith got injured. I would say, or not Riley Reif, Brian O'Neill. He held up in pass protection before Zadarius Smith got injured. But, and Reif he didn't do awful, but he did give up pressure. And so, he's kind of a suspect, but it's like Moser, Dozier, and Bradbury that were really the problem. And I just posted a mailbag over The Athletic, and I posted the pressure rates for interior offensive linemen across the league. And so I just kind of combined them, right? So the Vikings interior offensive line, the Rams interior offensive line, the Ravens interior, all of them, right, on a chart. And the Vikings far and away gave up the most pressure along the interior offensive line. I think a 12% pressure rate among interior offensive linemen. The Rams are second at 11%, so that's really bad. And then third place is Green Bay at like 6%. But the Rams and the Vikings are like twice that of like third and fourth place. It's absurd how much more pressure they're giving up along the interior offensive line. And there's not a great correction to that. Like, if the edge is giving up pressure That's generally worse. It tends to impact quarterbacks more than interior pressure, despite, our intuition that it's the other way around. But you can at least kind of help that a little bit with like a tight end or a running back. I'm not going to say you should chip the pass rusher, because there's some evidence that chipping the pass rusher actually reduces the effectiveness because it keeps the offensive lineman out of balance. But you can help an offensive lineman on the edge a little bit more than you can up the center. So that's tough. And if you're asking Dalvin Cook to pass protect, it means you're not asking him to run a route, and he's a pretty good receiver. That said, pass protection tends to be the more valuable thing a back can do in the passing game, at least historically. So maybe you have to keep Dalvin Cook in to pick up any free rusher that happens to be coming up. The problem with that is if you keep your running back in, especially against man coverage, a lot of linebackers who are assigned that running back in man coverage will, if the running back stays in the pocket, decide to blitz. And so you don't actually get that much extra help by keeping that running back in to help your guards out. So not a ton of fixes there in the passing game. Kirk Cousins under pressure for 60% of snaps. Remember, over the course of a year, the worst pressure rate a quarterback generally has is around 44%. Teddy had 45% one year. Last year, we saw one quarterback exceed even that. I forget who. And it's 40% or so is about where you get to the point where, unless it's Deshaun Watson, you're just not going to have an offense. It just kind of collapses everything. And then the Vikings were at 60% against the Packers. It was brutal.
So I guess we're going to have... Actually, no, I'm not going to talk about Kirk Cousins yet. You know what? Forget that guy. Where's Rudolph? He's not active in the passing game, it would appear, and I don't see him blocking. So what exactly is he doing?
Well, he is, in fact, doing a lot of pass protection.
Is he doing it well?
Well, no. Yeah, let's not go too far. He's definitely not doing it well. He is running routes. Like he is releasing into patterns. I think in this game, I've got like the stats up somewhere. In this game, so he runs 29 passing. So he's on the field for 65 snaps. That's every single offensive snap. So all the offensive linemen, 65 snaps. Adam Thielen, 64 snaps. Stephon Diggs, 58 snaps. Kyle Rudolph, 65 snaps. So he has more snaps than any other non-offensive lineman in the game, besides Kirk Cousins, of course. So non-offensive lineman, not quarterback. And of the 39 dropbacks the Vikings have, Rudolph is pass blocking for about a fourth of them. So for 10 of those passing snaps, he's pass blocking. Now, he gives up 2 hurries while in pass protection on 10 snaps. It's awful. That's just not good. He's not a good pass protector. And we actually saw him give up a sack in week 1. So cool. So he's releasing into passing patterns, and I think he's ranked at the bottom of tight ends in yards per route run, which doesn't surprise anybody who owns Kyle Rudolph in fantasy. He's just not getting targeted. And when he's getting targeted, it's, that wild overthrow in the end zone from somebody. And when he does get targeted, it's either inaccurate or it's for like 6 yards. He's just not showing up in an offense that I think a lot of people expected him to thrive in, because we're going to see tight ends on the field more often. And Cousins says, before the season, he wants to get Kyle Rudolph involved in the passing game more often. And he's coming off a string of 500-yard seasons. So where is he? Nowhere, I guess. I don't know.
Well, where he is on the line, not doing a very good job of what he's supposed to be doing. And I imagine that if the team was doing better at pass blocking, he would be out for targets. But as it stands, they need all the help they can get. Whether or not it's good or not is irrelevant at that point. They just need a body back there.
Yeah. The only huge issue is just that he ends up one-on-one a lot when he's in pass protection, which is, you don't want him there. You want him to be giving help, not needing help.
Okay. Actually, no, I'm going to stay on Rudolph. The times that I did catch him on the field, there were a lot of times that it looked like he was open.
He ended up not getting targeted on plays where he was probably the best option. I don't know why that is.
just ridiculous. And before we, go into the quarterback play for the game, there were just a couple, like, I don't know what it was, but the times that I did see Rudolph, he appeared to be open. It was like, it seemed like a progression thing. Like, you're going through, okay, nope. Rudolph is maybe Cousins is just thinking that Rudolph is always blocking for him. Be like, I don't need to look for Rudolph. I need all the help I can get back here.
Maybe that would be a really poor way of quarterbacking.
He was doing a very poor version of quarterbacking for a good amount of time during the game. So I'm saying it's possible.
I would say the more likely scenario is that Cousins was just not likely to go through his progressions very quickly. He was really stuck in his number 1 or number 2 in the progression, which I think we should talk about Cousins.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to. I think we've exhausted everything else we can possibly talk about except for Dan Bailey, who is apparently dead to us again. So Kirk Cousins did not make good decisions for a good chunk of this game. I think that is the nice version of what I can say. I'm not going to go on a rant about how, like, he took off his mask afterwards and he turned out to be Christian Ponder, and they both, had the Spider-Man meme where they're looking at each other. Like, it didn't feel like that. But
no, he did push the ball down the field. He had a fair amount of zip on some of his throws. It's not Christian Ponder, who ended up with a pretty high completion rate. Both years he was the primary starter in Minnesota, and a very low yards per attempt because he just would always check down. And there's a lot of people who are saying, Kirk Cousins always checks down, but he really doesn't. He's had a lot of deep throws. He does push the ball down the field, and he pushes the ball past the sticks on a consistent basis, especially on third down. So that he's not Christian Ponder. And I would say, obviously, he's a better quarterback than Christian Ponder. Now, did we see a better quarterback than Christian Ponder against the Packers this week? I don't think so. This might have been Kirk Cousins' worst game ever. He ends up the worst ranked quarterback by PFF this week. He ends up with the second worst accuracy in PFF this week. He didn't make good decisions. The issues with Cousins are related to essentially every aspect of quarterback play, like pocket management. Well, he sucked at that. Accuracy. Well, he sucked at that. Decision making. Well, he sucked at that. Anything that involves like an intangible trait of a quarterback. So basically everything but arm strength. And even then, you're just like, well, I probably should have whipped that ball a little faster. Everything about Cousins from a quarterbacking standpoint that you would coach up, right, wasn't there. You just failed in every aspect of being a quarterback. And it's frustrating, right? Like, you see the one deep throw he had to Diggs for a touchdown. Beautiful.
That
great
managed
placement.
To be completed in defiance of God's will. That happened. That was completed. Everyone just like, holy crap, that was an amazing throw. Wow, that really could have been a pick.
Right. Well, the thing is, some people are like, hey, did Cousins get lucky on that? And no, he made a great throw that if it had been a tenth of a second later, could have been defensed by the oncoming player, who I don't think was a safety. I think it was a corner. I think it was Jair Alexander. I don't remember. But the incoming player was just a half a step maybe out of it. And I think you give Cousins credit for it. Perfect accuracy, perfect arm strength, perfect timing. Phenomenal throw. Also, that's all he had. That's all he had that game. Do you want to talk about it?
You know what? Let's go through the top 5 worst decisions made by Kirk Cousins on the day.
Sure.
Let's go with this. The first terrible decision I want to talk about. I'll go in reverse order from the notes.
Right.
Let's talk about how Diggs looked exasperated on the overthrow where he outstretched and was still missed and was lying on the ground for a lot longer than a normal catch or normal miss.
Deep right of the field, a little bit later in the game, Diggs has a step and a half, maybe a step on the corner assigned to cover him. When I want to say that corner was Alexander, doesn't matter. He has a step on him, and he's just wide open. So you throw it to the sideline. That's the correct throw. He's open. He's got a step. He's got exclusive real estate. You throw it to that area of the field where only Diggs has access to it, so I watched it live, and I was like, just missed him. And I watched it on broadcast and on replay, and it wasn't to just missed him. The fact that Diggs got as close as he did is a huge credit to Diggs. And I don't think he got a finger on it. He barely didn't get a finger on it. But he's like leaping, flayed out on the field, right? Putting his body on the line to catch this pass that he had every right to need that pass to be 3 feet closer to him. Like, not even a couple inches to the left or the right. Like, he doesn't need to be inch perfect like he was on that touchdown throw that we just talked about. He needs to be like in the area code of the guy who's like wide open. And he wasn't. He threw it to Milwaukee. Like, it was just awful. And Diggs lays out for it. And it's later in the game, right? So Diggs knows every one of these throws matters. And he knows that the Packers defense is playing pretty well. And so he knows he's probably not going to get that open again. And it just sails, not even out of bounds, just upfield. Then it bounces out of bounds. And Diggs just lays there. And I remember I'm in the press box, right? And there's a bunch of the Vikings beat next to me. And one of them says, "Is Diggs injured? Is he hurt?" And I just go, "No, he's just sad."
He's not mad. He's just disappointed. It really had the look of just like,
yeah, like he's hurt existentially.
Yeah,
but certainly not in the way you meant.
His feeling is hurt. And this wasn't the only overthrow to Diggs that'll be covered, but we'll talk about more in a sec. Next one I want to talk about is the overthrow to Thielen, when again wide open,
even more open than Diggs was.
He might. I think it was, and he didn't even have to outstretch for it either. He was right there, and it sailed like 6 feet over the guy's head.
Yeah, I didn't even have a chance. Like, Diggs maybe has it. Like, if you put a pogo stick underneath Diggs, he's got a chance on that one. There's no chance for Thielen on that. I have no idea where Cousins is placing this throw. It's just, like, there's not much else to say. It's brutal. Like, Thielen's open deep, he's open to the right, and it's like, Cousins doesn't have a problem with that throw, typically. Like, he can throw outside the hashes, to the deep right, to the deep left, into areas where only the receiver can get it. And he can do a fairly decent job of that. He's pretty good. He's better than the most quarterbacks in the NFL at that. And he's got another opportunity to do this, and he just can't. It's just out.
What's fun to me is watching Cousins overthrow a receiver when he is wide open. Like, he is more likely, if we did a deep dive statistically on when Kirk Cousins is most likely to overthrow a receiver, it is when he is wide open. And it's just bizarre. And it was like this last year too, that the overthrows were clear victories for the wide receiver. And it was just not going to end up happening. But, or if it's, he has two options. It's either that or he overthrows when he is like in the red zone or something, but it's always like 6 feet above the guy's head. Like, there's no way the guy ends up getting it.
Right, which we saw in this game too with Kyle Rudolph.
Yeah, exactly.
6 feet over his head.
Yeah, so let's go with another Diggs one here. Let's go out with the bounced off of Diggs for the pick. Diggs' hands were not his strong suit this game.
Yeah, so I would say it definitely looked like, especially live, it definitely looked like it bounced off of Diggs. I went like Zapruder film frame by frame on that pick because I wanted to see if it was actually on Diggs, right? Like if the pick's fault is Diggs, or if the pick's fault is Cousins. Because I think that in a 2 interception game, if one of those interceptions is not actually on the quarterback, it kind of changes the tenor of that conversation. Like, oh, there were moments he played well and the receivers let him down, right? Like, you could say that, right? And Diggs has another drop in this game for you to take a look at and say, hey, Diggs kept dropping passes, man. It's not just on Kirk. If he catches those passes, the Vikings maybe score 7 more points. If they score 7 more points, they win, right? And so it was kind of important to determine if one of the biggest plays of the game was actually on Diggs. I go frame by frame, Diggs maybe gets kind of a hand on it. Like, it's mostly Darnell Savage who does a great job closing in on it and getting a hand on it before Diggs does. So Diggs has a little bit of his right hand touch the ball, it looks like, on replay. But mostly the contact is actually made by Savage. But with how quickly it happens and the direction the ball bounces, which is directly away from Diggs, it really looks like Diggs touches it. And so that's an iffy decision kind of regardless because he's in quadruple coverage. And Rudolph, actually, speaking of where he is off to the right, just being wide open at the same depth. It's not even like the throw to Diggs, there's like a greater reward for the risk you're taking. Rudolph is like right there. You just kind of have to loop it a little bit around the linebacker and make sure that Savage doesn't close in on it. Because Savage.
But there was no time to look at Rudolph in that. It looked like a snap and throw.
Yeah, but that means you have to be correct in your pre-snap read, and he wasn't. So like, you got to figure, like, if you're going to do a snap and throw, you have to realize what the defense is going to look like, and you have to pull the ball back if it's not there. I mean, like, that's just part of the game. Like, that's what they teach air raid quarterbacks. It's like, if the color isn't there, if the bodies aren't there, then you pull back and you try to improvise, or you just go to your second read real quick. Like, there's a guy that's open and a guy that's not open. He throws it to the guy that's not open. You can examine kind of why that's the case. Pre-delegated read, quick snap and throw, trying to get the Packers defense kind of off base. Fine, I understand all that. That's an examination of kind of what happened, and that'll maybe give you some better answers as to why it happened and how to prevent it in the future. And if it's important to ask the question whose fault it is, but it doesn't change the fact that it is Kirk Cousins' fault, and he had a guy who was open at the same depth that he didn't throw it to, and so he should have realized that there were 4 defenders in that area, and that it was more likely to go wrong than right. Because even if Diggs catches it, I mean, he's not healthy to play against the Raiders. Like, that's the other problem, right? If Diggs catches it, he gets laid out.
You're putting him in a position to get killed.
It's
regardless. It just
So
okay.
Bad decision to throw it there. Phenomenal, arm strength. A surprising kind of good accuracy. Like, it doesn't really touch Diggs. A lot of that's because of Savage. So, like, pretty decent accuracy on that throw. Not great, otherwise only Diggs has it. But just demonstrably awful decision.
Yeah. And we're not even at number 1 yet. So we're going to go to the number 2 worst decision made by Kirk Cousins of the day. The 3 minutes left near interception to Thielen.
Right. So, the Packers get the ball with 5:17 left for a reason that we will discuss in the next decision. But the Packers get the ball. The Vikings either force a 4 and out or a 3 and out, but they get the ball back with like 4 minutes left. They decide to run the ball on first down. They only get 3 yards. And I understand 4 minutes, you're running your 4-minute offense, right? So you do want to actually drain the clock a little bit. Plus, I mean, they're running 7.7 yards a carry, right? Like, just run the ball. So I get it. They run the ball. They only get 3 yards. Then now it's 2nd and long, so you need to pass it. So they decide to pass it. One side of the field, you're running kind of a corner, not hitch or corner smash or anything like that, but you're running a corner route with an in-breaking route to the inside, which it's a very common concept, and I can't get the name in my head yet, but it's like a corner pivot or a corner whip. So you've got Rudolph underneath, and you've got Thielen up top. Really great against cover 2 and great against a bunch of zone coverages. And then on the other side, you've got Diggs running it out, and another player kind of running underneath that. Pretty good against man coverage. Okay, so you've got a man beater on one side and a zone beater on the other side. Very common way to design plays. The quarterback, before the snap, tries to figure out if it looks like it's man coverage or zone coverage, reads that side of the field first, throws to the read that's open based off of that coverage in the pre-snap read. Okay, drops back and the coverage is not what he thinks it is. It looks like it's zone before the snap. And to the Packers defense, I think they do disguise it well. They've got their defensive backs looking at the quarterback, which is a sign of zone defense, instead of looking at the receiver, which is the sign of man defense. And they're kind of aligned in areas close to the landmarks for zones. Okay, he thinks it's zone. Fine. He decides to look at his zone beater first. Drop back, take 2.5 steps of your 5-step drop back. Now it's pretty clear that they're in a single high safety, and Cousins can see that. So then if it's a zone, it's cover 3. And if it's not a zone, it's man, right? It's cover 1. So, okay, so now those are your 2 options. Well, then you can't throw the corner route, because if it's man coverage, then you've got your receiver who has got inside leverage against a cornerback who is essentially an outside trail. He's got the sideline. So the cornerback has the sideline in man, and when he turns around, he breaks in on the ball to break it up. Or if the ball is thrown outside, he intercepts it. Or if it's zone, it's cover 3, because you got the single high safety. You can't throw a corner route against cover 3. It's designed to stop the corner route. Like, it is meant to stop that. Because you got essentially a cornerback in a zone for where the receiver is going to enter. So you can't throw it there. So you see a single high safety, 9 times out of 10, you have to snap to your man beaters, or you have to snap to the other zone beater on the side. You can't throw it to Thielen. You should probably take a look at the other side of the field. Okay. Then he gets to the top of his drop, and it's very clear that it's man coverage. Thielen is covered. He decides to throw to Thielen. Okay. Bad decision. Don't throw to Thielen. Why are you throwing to Thielen? He's not open. There's tighter coverage on him than there is on any other receiver in the field. You're throwing against the wrong coverage. That's the wrong decision. But if you're committed to this decision, because he's kind of staring to the right, he's not taking a look at the left at all. If you're committed to the decision, where do you throw the ball? You throw it inside. You throw it to Thielen's inside shoulder, because that's the only area where Thielen is likely to win that contested catch. And that's actually, so someone said, Thielen slowed down. That's a little bit on Thielen. No, it's not. Thielen is creating space for the quarterback. And if he runs into the corner, there's less space for the quarterback to fit the ball. So he's creating space for the quarterback by creating an area of the field that only he can get it, especially because he's such a great contested catch receiver. So you throw it to Thielen's inside shoulder instead of outside of Thielen, which typically, if you're throwing a corner route, you do want to throw it to the sideline. You do want to throw it over the top so the receiver can use his body to shield the ball away from the defender that's behind him. But instead, Kirk is throwing the ball as if Jair Alexander, who's in coverage here, is the intended receiver, throws it to an area where actually only Alexander has access to it. Thielen tries to turn into a defensive back and tries to get his hand on the ball, does kind of a decent job. It's not enough. It falls right into Jair Alexander's hands, and if he holds on to that, we're talking about this pick instead of the other pick, because it occurs at the end of the game. It's the final possession for the Vikings. That was on second down. On third down, Cousins overthrows the middle of the field, which actually that should probably turn into a pick too, but that wasn't as close a pick as this one. And the Vikings were forced to I'm not going to say they're forced to punt. I would have gone for it. 3.5 minutes left. Like, I understand your defense is forcing 3 and outs all game, but like, Jesus, man. You might not get the ball back, and indeed you didn't. So I don't think they should punt on 4th and 7 in their own territory in that situation. Like, I know it sounds absurd, but I think you have to go for it. But they don't. So third down, overthrow, miss it, they punt, they never get the ball back. So, well, they do get the ball back for 7 seconds. But they meaningfully don't get the ball back. But yeah, that we're talking about that pick instead of another prominent pick, because that's just, I think that's an awful throw in every respect, because, yeah, there's a bunch of pressure around him in the pocket. A lot of people, I brought this play up on Twitter. A lot of people were like, well, there's a lot of pressure. He can't move to a second read. And I would agree with that if he's making his reads at the top of his drop. But that's not what quarterbacks do. They read the defense as they're moving back, and they need to diagnose the defense during the drop back. And it's not even like he should count 1 to 2. And go from his first read to a second read. It's that he should flip the side of the field he's reading as that defense is revealing itself. But even then, like, and the throw to Diggs is easier. Like, I know there's a lot of pressure, but the throw to Diggs is easier because he's breaking much sooner in the route concept. And you throw as the receiver breaks, so the ball comes as he's getting out of his break. So you actually throw before the receiver gets open. I mean, which is pretty common. But Diggs is on the other. So this is the thing that's really infuriating. Diggs destroys Kevin King. Like he has like 8 yards of separation at one point in the route. Like, it's not close. You got like 3 minutes and 17 seconds or something like that at the point of the throw. Diggs gets the ball. He turns up field. He doesn't even want to go out of bounds, right? Because you want to drain the clock a little bit. He gets the ball, turns up field, gets 15, 16 yards. You get the first down. You can run the ball again. You're doing that pretty well all game. You just need the first down. Diggs is wide. He crushes this guy, right? He's wide open. And he's not part of the progression because Cousins doesn't adjust his progression and make a different set of reads. People were talking about the offensive line. The offensive line did play poorly on that play. Like, it's not like they did a really good job. Cousins gets hit as he throws, which might even be part of the reason that the accuracy is off there. But you know how you give yourself margin for error if you're going to get hit as you throw? Throw to the guy that's wide open so he doesn't have to turn into a defensive back if your throw's off target. So it's an egregious decision because it violates the rules of the pre-snap read. It violates his progression, and it was thrown in the wrong. Like, there's so many reasons it's a bad throw, and then of course it occurs with 3 minutes left in the game. So, just awful.
So let's talk about the last one. Let's talk about the end zone interception that was thrown to Diggs that for a brief second looked like Diggs was open. But this was the sort of problem that you and I cataloged last year when Cousins would try to pull a Rodgers and throw to the outside, but wouldn't have enough. It was either that or he was trying to just land it in just right. If he would have overthrown it, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. It looked like he was trying to overthrow it or give the impression of an overthrow. And for a moment, for a brief second, it looked okay if you were getting a look at like the all-22. But that was a poor choice.
Yeah, so that play breaks down for just like the play we just talked about, breaks down for a number of reasons. So I'll just kind of walk through the process of the play and identify kind of the decision points that bug me. So the call comes in, right? The Vikings, the reason that they're at first and goal from the 8 is because they've run the ball really successfully, right? So they've got an 8-yard run, a 3-yard run, a 1-yard run, a 10-yard run, and a 14-yard run. Like, just really incredible, right? Or something along this. Like, I might have, been wrong about a couple of those numbers, or I might have added a run in there that wasn't there. But for the most part, really great stuff. They run the ball, they get there, and they're rolling, right? They're actually rolling as opposed to, oh, wow, 75-yard touchdown. The offense is good to go. Actually rolling. They're just steamrolling over the Packers, right? And then they decide to call a pass. And I personally would have called a run, but I get it. We asked Zimmer after the game, hey, you're running the ball really well. And you kind of are a guy that likes to run the ball a little bit more than your average coach, right? Like, it's a thing, right? So why didn't you run the ball there? And he says, well, the Packers defense had a lot of trouble getting aligned after our plays. We decided if we were going to hurry up to the snap and snap the ball, we'd catch them out of alignment. Which, I mean, personally, I think that works for a run just as well. But hey, they're expecting a pass, right? And it's a play action, it's a wide zone, it's a naked boot, just like we had talked about. And it doesn't, the defense figures it out, right? Like, okay, they've been getting aligned pretty incorrectly as you're moving down the field, and this time they didn't, and they figured it out, and they read the play pretty well. Okay, I understand. Like, I would have called a run, but I think it's nitpicky to say that that's the incorrect call there, because I think the logic does make sense. But after that, Cousins gets the ball. He's rolling out. He doesn't have his feet set. I get it. But you're right. Diggs gets open. And after the game, they asked Kevin King, like, hey, what were you thinking as you're going? What was your thought process as you got through that interception? And King said he was beat. He was like, yeah, for the beginning of the play, I was beat. And so really my only option was to try and catch up and make a play on the receiver, not even on the ball, on the receiver, right? Which that's actually the appropriate thing to do. So like a lot of people say, hey, get your head turned around, right? What are you doing? But if you're out of phase, which is like half a step or a step behind, the correct thing for defensive backs to do in most defenses, every coach coaches things differently, but the correct thing is to play the receiver's hands. So turning back to look at the ball is going to slow you down. It's not going to let you play that receiver's hands. It's not going to let you create a pass deflection once the ball arrives, which is your only option at that point. And that's what he's trying to do. When you're in phase, that's when you turn back and look at the ball, which, Vikings defenders have been in phase and not looked back at the ball. That's their fault. I'm not saying that every single time we say look back at the ball, we're wrong. Trey Waynes had a problem this game where he needed to look back at the ball because he was in phase and the ball was arriving and he should have read the receiver to see that the ball was coming, and he doesn't, right? Oh, that happens. He makes up for it later by like levitating a guy out of bounds, but fine. So King is in a spot where he needs to play the receiver's hands, and he's against a receiver who makes it very difficult to play his hands. A, because he does the late hands thing that everyone's talked about for the past 2 years, where he flashes his hands late as the ball arrives. It's very difficult to tell when the ball is coming. But also he's just got great hands, right? Like, yeah, okay, he dropped a pass earlier in the game, but he's got great hands. He last year he led the league in contested catch win rate, like, and the year before that he was second. Like, okay, fine. That's when you throw the ball. And that is true for about a step and a half, 2 steps for Diggs. Maybe. 2 steps is maybe a little generous. And then he's no longer open. It's done. You're not open anymore. That's how quickly windows close in the NFL. He's open longer than he had any right to be in the red zone. It's tough. So he's open, and Cousins sees Dean Lowry kind of barreling down on him. And the correct move, if you're going to throw the ball, is to step into that contact and fire the ball off, and then just take one on the chin. I think the correct move is to throw it away. But if you're trying to make a completion, that's where you do it. But he doesn't. So he sees Diggs open, but he also sees Dean Lowry. And he knows he can probably outrace Dean Lowry for some time. And he's right. So he loops all the way out around the play. And at that point, no one is open. So he should throw the ball away. It's first down. You're in 4-down territory. So you actually have 3 more downs, not just 2 more downs. You've got 3 more downs, which means you might be able to run the ball, right? And you don't need to force the ball and play hero ball. You just get rid of it. Just throw it away. But he doesn't do that. He decides to throw it. And again, if you're throwing the ball in that situation, you need to step into contact, take a helmet to the chin, maybe get a penalty, and have better mechanics on the throw. I think that's a bad idea because you need to preserve your health. You're the quarterback. You should throw the ball away. But if you're going to do it, you got to do it in a way where the ball gets delivered. And here he doesn't. He's on his back foot. He's walking backwards, like 15 yards from the line of scrimmage, and he's leaning away from contact instead of leaning into it. He's leaning away from contact, which robs him of any power he can have. And he decides, hey, Diggs has the back corner of the end zone. That's his. No one else can get to the back corner of the end zone. Only Diggs can, which is true. That's a correct assessment of the situation. And then he says in his head, obviously he's not narrating, he's just throwing off of instinct, but essentially the thought process is, I'm going to put the ball there at the back end of the end zone, which means I need to arc it over these 2 defenders, because now Diggs has 2 defenders on him. I need to arc it over these 2 defenders where Diggs is at the back corner of the end zone where only he can get it, because it's either ours or nobody's. And that's what he says after the game. Ours or nobody's. That was his thought process on that. That's a low percentage throw, but if there's no risk, I understand. But the thing is, Cousins is a quarterback that's got a very defined set of tools. He's got above average arm strength. He's got above average accuracy. But he doesn't have those things if he's throwing off of his back foot leading away from a defender. And yet he decides that he does. And so he throws the ball to the back corner of the end zone, except that he doesn't throw it to the back corner of the end zone. He throws it to Diggs in a straight line. And that's a problem because there's a couple of people in the way, one of them being cornerback Kevin King. Now, Kevin King makes contact with Diggs, but the thing here is that Diggs actually does make contact first after the ball is released. He folds King's arms into King's chest, and King responds by pushing his arm out, and that pushes Diggs out of the way. Now, I know a couple of Vikings fans, I don't even think it's most of them, but a couple of Vikings fans, and I addressed this in my mailbag at The Athletic, say he should have been called for pass interference with that play, and I disagree. I think that's very normal jostling for the ball. I don't think if you're not interfering with the catch process in the same way. No one's pulling on a jersey. No one's pulling on a limb. The arms aren't hooked. It's strength versus strength, really. And that's a very normal situation. And he happens to win. And Diggs is falling away from it, so he doesn't have a base by which to win. So Diggs initiates contact, and then Kevin King responds, right? So I think it was a good no call, and he gets the ball. So there's a lot of points in this play where Cousins either should throw the ball early or throw it away late. But he shouldn't throw it to Diggs late. It's the thing that bothers me so much, more than anything else, more than he thinks he can make this throw, more than he decides to throw it into the back corner of the end zone, more than anything else, more than the play call, which again, I don't have a huge problem with, is that it's first down. You don't need to take risks. You don't need to make that throw. Throw it away. And the thing is, that's not even the game-sealing interception. The Vikings defense, 3 and out, 4 and out, something like that, they get the ball back, right? And last year, Cousins throws an interception, not his fault. I think it was either Stephon Diggs or Laquan Treadwell. I think it's Laquan Treadwell. There's another Diggs interception where, he's supposed to sit or he's supposed to continue and Cousins thinks he's going to sit, or vice versa, right? One or the other. And you could say it's either on Diggs or on Cousins. Difficult one. But there's one, he just bounces off of Treadwell's hands. It's an interception. It's going to seal the game. They get the ball back. They drive all the way down the field and tie up the game, and they go into overtime, right? A remarkable throw to Adam Thielen in the corner on a switch concept. Phenomenal throw, right? It could have been the same. So we would have forgotten about, just like we kind of forgot about that other interception, which was more Treadwell's fault than anything. So we can just point to it and say Treadwell sucks. But if he throws that pick and then he goes back and leads the game-winning drive, we're just like, don't do that again. But hey, great job, right? So that's not the end of the game, but it feels like the end of the game. It was such an awful, abysmal decision. As it's happening, the whole press box live are just like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? Before he even throws the ball, we're just like, stop. Don't do this. Then he throws the ball and everyone's like, what? And then it's an interception. Everyone's like, well, no shit. It's obviously an interception. What are you doing? So you can say a lot about how difficult it is to quarterback in the NFL. It is. It's tremendously difficult. Obviously, Cousins is going to be better than anyone listening to this podcast. But don't let that stop you. Follow your dreams. But bullets are flying. You got to be instinctive. You can't think too much. You just have to make throws, right? It's difficult to evaluate what's going through a quarterback's head. I remember it might have been the Miracle play, or it could have just been some other random hockey play. Not Minneapolis Miracle, a Miracle against the Soviet Union, where some hockey player buzzer beater, right? Which they don't have buzzer beaters in the same way, because when the buzzer goes off, it doesn't matter where the puck is. But end of the game, scores, right? And they ask him after the game, what were you thinking? And his answer is thinking. You can't be thinking. No one's thinking. You just do. That's what practice is for. You put yourself into a position where you don't have to think because you've done it. So you can say all of these things about quarterbacking. You just kind of have to play off of your instant snapshot assessment of the situation. And it's difficult. But I can tell you, everybody in that press box was reacting at the same speed. And we don't have Dean Lowry about to crush us, right? Like, I get it. But we knew it was a bad decision before he got rid of the ball. So basic level quarterbacking, adjusted for the fact that, he's getting, paid to play quarterback and we're not. So he needs to be able to make this decision, even under the duress that he's in. If we can tell real time that it's a bad decision before he makes it, it's inexcusable for him to throw it. So just awful. I hope any children listening to the podcast, A, don't mind me swearing, B, become better quarterbacks.
Please go through your progressions. The moment that he went on his back foot, my thought was, okay, he's throwing it away. There's no way that he's dumb enough to try to like dig this directly in. Like there was no way. And if he was going to try to do something like for a catch, you would think he'd try to do like a toe tap in the corner. And that was not the direction that he went.
Yeah, well, he couldn't give himself the tools to make the throw he wanted to make. Like that throw you're talking about, toe tap in the corner. That's what he said he was thinking about after the game, and I believe him. But he couldn't because he was throwing off platform, leaning away from pressure, removing all power that he had on the throw. And he should know that about his body. It's his 7th year in the NFL. He should know what he can and can't do. That said,
you start going off that back foot and you start pulling Tavares Jackson stuff.
Right. Like you're not Patrick Mahomes. You're not Aaron Rodgers. You're not a guy who has so much arm strength that, I mean, even Johnny Manziel did this in college. That has so much arm strength when you're throwing off play. And I know people think that he didn't have that much arm strength in college. And this is a reason I actually disagree, because he had remarkable ability to thread a needle when he's throwing off of his back foot. That's just, you're not Cam Newton, good Cam Newton, right? Like not now Cam Newton, but healthy Cam Newton. You don't have the ability to thread these needles off your back foot. And you should just know that about yourself. And so some quarterbacks can do that and make that decision and put the ball in the right spot, right? We've seen it. Apparently Lamar Jackson could do it too. He's been incredible. But, you're more Teddy than Lamar, right? Like you can't do that. You can't throw off your back foot expecting you to have the same accuracy and arm strength that you normally have. That said, a lot of people are asking, and I got this in the mailbag and I answered it, can you win a Super Bowl with Kirk Cousins? Should the Vikings draft a quarterback? Is the Cousins experiment over? We're asking this after he's had the worst game of his career. I'm not going to guarantee it, but I'm going to say he's never going to have a game as bad as this again. Now, there's some possibility that he is. Like, I understand. Like, you can't be definitive. I don't know that.
We're open to be proven wrong.
Right, yeah. And certainly he seems to be open to it. But it's extremely likely he never has a game as bad as this again. He's had some really good games for the Vikings, too. Right. And he's had some good games in the past. I mean, he was fourth in 2017. He was fourth in the league in passer rating and adjusted net yards per attempt, even though pass rating may not be a great statistic, but fourth in the league in adjusted net yards per attempt. He's had some good games, and he's got, these phenomenal receivers. He's got a running game that, I'm not going to say it's like 2012 because we're only 2 games in, but it's one of the most dominant running games in the NFL right now, this year. Hey, maybe you can say, hey, the running game doesn't affect the passing game that much. I kind of believe that. I think the statistics bear it out. But what that means is that when you're having a bad game, you can just kind of turn it off and relax for a little bit, right? So I don't think he's going to have a game as bad as this ever again, right? And I think he's going to start next year too, right? I think you can win a Super Bowl with him. I don't think he'll be the reason you win, right? But I think you can win a Super Bowl with him. Maybe you just have to game manage, right? We've seen teams. I mean, the Vikings defense plays like it did for the final 3 quarters of that game. It's going to be really hard for anybody to score. It's going to be hard for Aaron Rodgers to score points because he didn't, right? In those final 3 quarters. It's going to be hard for Tom Brady to score those. I mean, the defense was phenomenal, right? Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes will have trouble against that defense, right? If a defense plays like that, which defenses are unstable, and there's this really interesting study that PFF put out that says 2 weeks in, you'll know more about an offense than you'll ever know over the course of a season about a defense. So fair enough, right? Like you can't say for sure that defense is going to continue to be good, except it was the number 1 defense in the NFL in 2017, and it was like the number 3 defense in the NFL in 2018. At least, especially after you get rid of those first 4 weeks and they changed their scheme to a quarters cover scheme. So it's a defense, and it's been number 1 in third down percentage 2 years running, right? So it's a defense that we can at least reliably say is more likely to buck the trend than other defenses. So it's a top 5 defense, right? That can it's not going to take you as far as the top 5 offense, but that can take you pretty far. And if you game manage your way with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen and Kyle Rudolph and Dalvin Cook, you can win a Super Bowl. absolutely you can win a Super Bowl. He's not going to be the reason you win it. He's not going to make it more likely, but he's far better than a lot of these quarterbacks, especially after what's happened in the first 2 weeks with injuries and benchings, right? Like Eli Manning, which someone in the comments of the mailbag said, I'd rather have Eli. No, you wouldn't. You absolutely would not.
No.
He's better than a lot of quarterbacks right now. And Josh Allen is producing, more expected points or whatever. I'd still rather have Cousins than Josh Allen. I'd rather have Cousins than a lot of these quarterbacks, even if we go with the intended starters for this year instead of the ones that just kind of emerged, like Luke Falk, apparently, or Gardner Minshew.
You mean the porn director?
Yeah, right. Which
Straight
actually,
out of Boogie Nights.
Gardner Minshew might play each other. They both came from the Mike Leach, Washington State, which is kind of interesting. But like,
that's a hell of a coaching tree. That's a hell of a QB tree right there.
Yeah, it's so random. But yeah, so if we take a look at the intended starter for the season, which includes Eli Manning, Ben Roethlisberger, who is hurt, I would take Cousins over most of them. So if you've got a top half quarterback who, maybe he sucks in 2 minutes, so it's going to be really difficult, you can win a Super Bowl with him. Now, should the Vikings draft a quarterback? Obviously it depends on the quarterbacks that are available and where you pick. But if the Vikings are in a position where they can still make the playoffs, it's just been 2 games. They're 1-1. They've got, they're an 8-point favorites against Oakland, which, doesn't guarantee anything. They lost against the Bills last year after being 17-point favorites. But let's say they win the game against Oakland, which I think is very likely. I mean, I'd say that they're going to win the game against Oakland, and most people would say that. So they're going to win the game against Oakland. They've got a game on the road against Chicago. That's going to tell us a lot more about kind of the nature of the season and who Kirk Cousins is this year. But I think it's very possible that they win, even though they're on the road in Soldier Field, where they historically haven't performed well. If they win that game, they're clearly back in it, right? And they've got a great shot to be at the top of the division, especially because Rodgers kind of sucks. I shouldn't say sucks. He's been an average quarterback, but he's an average quarterback, right? So, and the team leading the division right now, I think, is the Lions. Whatever, man.
Lions aren't leading it technically. The Packers are leading it, and then it's the Lions.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, whatever.
Packers with 2 wins, the Lions with a win and a tie.
Win and a tie. So yeah, okay. I think you can win the division. If you don't, you can get in the playoffs. In the playoffs, anything happens. So I think you can win a Super Bowl with Cousins. And I think if you're in that position where you're in the playoff hunt, I don't think you're likely going to get into a situation where there's a quarterback available. Like, I don't think it's going to be like when Teddy fell or when Lamar fell that you can find a quarterback. I think it's pretty unlikely. I don't know because I don't know which quarterbacks are available, but because like Trevor Lawrence isn't available, but like Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa are going to be available. They're going to go kind of early. Do you take a quarterback? Probably not, but I wouldn't be against it. But yeah, I'm not saying like don't panic, do whatever you want, but I say that there's not a ton of reasons to panic.
You're more thinking that this may turn into a like Joe Flacco type Super Bowl run where it's almost done in spite of him.
Well, I mean, Flacco did turn it on in the playoffs. I'll say that. But yeah, he had an average year that year. And if Cousins has an average year, I think Vikings fans end up being pretty happy because if Cousins has an average year and the defense plays like it did for those 3 quarters or just genuinely above average, they're in the playoffs and then Cousins, maybe he has this Flacco moment. But it doesn't even have to be like the Flacco year. Like, I think Cousins is an above average quarterback. He could play like a generically above average quarterback can. A bunch of those have made the Super Bowl, right? So, yeah, you can get there.
Okay, let's stop talking about Kirk Cousins and his abilities, intangibles, and terrible throws and potential, and talk about some BS. Because the pass interference call that was added on to the play after review ended up being a major situation, or ended up being a major point of the game. And it felt a lot like, so I know you're not a huge hockey person. When in hockey, they do a review of the goal and they check to see if there's a high stick that happened during the play, and it felt to me a bit like, as a hockey fan, watching a goal for your team end up getting called back because a player who was nowhere near the play had a high stick up, and it ended up being negated, and the whole crowd just freaks out and boos like, yeah, but it didn't matter. It was nowhere near it. It wasn't actually a point. Like, it looked like they were looking for any reason at all not to count the touchdown, as opposed to enforcing a rule, which, of course, is the fault of the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah. So a couple of offensive pass interference penalties in that game, three on the Vikings, one on the Packers. And I would say I didn't really pay that much attention to one of the Packers. Maybe that one was called incorrectly. I don't know. The one on the, which, I mean, maybe I should have paid more attention because it's like, yeah, it was good for the Vikings. Well, I won't look at it any further. But the one on Cook, I think, so I don't think any of them are the right call. But I think the one on Cook makes the most sense because it's a pick play. Cook disengages from, I want to say, B.J. Goodson and then re-engages with Darnell Savage. And if you disengage with one player and engage with another player, that dramatically increases the likelihood that you're going to get called for offensive pass interference. Now, the thing is, I think he commits a penalty, but I don't think he commits a penalty that is available to the refs after review, because the only penalty that they can call, they can call all kinds of penalties after review, but the only penalty that's applicable that they can call in that situation is offensive pass interference. And you can only call that while the ball is in the air. And Cook basically is disengaged by the time the ball gets out of Cousins' hands. And so I don't think it's offensive pass interference, but I think it is a penalty, which, again, is not available to him on review. And I do think it's very close to being offensive pass interference in terms of when the ball is in the air. I think it's the wrong call, and I think if you're going to review things, I mean, the standard the NFL always tells us is the default is to stick to the call on the field, which I don't think, if it's that close, they should have just gone with the call on the field, which is nothing. So I think it was a pretty poor call. But I think the other two offensive pass interference penalties were egregiously worse. They didn't happen on review. They happened live. So they don't get the benefit of like, hey, you should stick with the default call on the field. The problem is when the challenge flag has been thrown for pass interference, it has almost always been to add, or in terms of success. It's only been successful when you've added a pass interference play that wasn't there before. And I don't know that it has been successful this year, getting rid of a pass interference call. I can't say that for sure, but I know at least through the first 3 weeks of the preseason, it wasn't. And for most of the regular season, at least for most of the regular season, they haven't subtracted the pass interference play. So that one's a difficult one to challenge, and maybe the Vikings are kind of aware of that. But those were awful. The one on Diggs, same problem as the Cook one, without the same kind of benefit of the doubt. I don't think any penalty occurs, but if a penalty occurs, it would only have occurred after the ball is in the air, or before the ball is in the air. So no pass interference is committed because the ball is not in the air when contact is made. What I think happens on that play is a normal part of route running, just like I think the Kevin King thing is a normal part of the ball being in the air, right? Or he wasn't even in the air yet. A normal part of just jostling for position. That's totally normal. I don't think it's pass interference at all, right? Same thing with this Diggs one, where at the top of your route, you make contact with the defender, and then you leave the defender. It looks like you've extended your arm. It looks like you've pushed the defender away. That's not really what happens. But regardless, even if it does happen, it's been legal in the NFL forever. It's just part of route. It's just the way you run routes. And he gets open on the comeback, and then he gets called for offensive pass interference. Awful call. I think it's terrible. The one on Thielen, I think, is even worse. I don't even know where the contact was made. Like, I can't. Like the Cook one, I explained my thought process for why they might have called it. The Diggs one, I can see where the contact was made for them to call it. This one, the Thielen one, is just like, what the hell, man? It was awful.
Yeah, a little weird, to say the least.
Yeah, like, he's not allowed to go to the ball. Like, I don't even know, like, 'cause he's like over the top of the defense. Like, I get that, but that's not pass interference. That happens all the time. Thielen's best catches are over the top of the defender. Like,
it was, upon review of it, it was a situation where they both pushed off, but they only called it on Thielen, so it was just ugly. Well, we're running a little bit long. Let's hit the mailbag and knock out some of this misery. Matt Nelson starts us off with, so Arif, have you given any thought to your comments on Norse Code about how Rodgers isn't aggressive and throws the ball away too early? But that's pretty much exactly why we lost the game with Kirk at 1st and goal.
I mean, you got to manage your risk. It's 1st and goal. That's when you throw the ball away. 3rd down, you can't throw the ball away. Plus, there's a difference between like throwing it 20 yards downfield in a one-score or in a multi-score game, or early enough in the game where you can evaluate risk versus reward. It's about risk management. The risk of a 40-yard interception on 3rd down versus the reward of 40 yards and the probabilities, right? Like, maybe there's like a 8% chance, a 10% chance, which would be really high, 10% chance of an interception on this throw, and only a 30% chance of a completion. Well, interceptions are worth negative 45 yards. A completion here is 40 yards, and if it's 3 times more likely, then you throw it, right? That's the risk management. Here, an interception loses you the game. And so a 10% chance, which again is pretty high, of an interception is a 10% chance of losing the game. Whereas the completion is also pretty low probability. I don't think it's 3 times higher in this case, like it would be for a generic 40-yard pass down the field. It's not about negative 45 yards, positive 20 yards, or anything like that. It turns from expected points into win probability. And the win probability of that throw, if it's correct, is that Diggs has exclusive access to the ball, so it's probably an incompletion. You throw that ball, it's a touchdown, you're probably winning the game. But they get the ball back and they'll drive. And to the Vikings' credit, like they do get the ball back, so it didn't lose the game. But most scenarios where an offense like that gets the ball back with 4 minutes left, they're gonna win. So interception, 80% chance you lose the game, versus a touchdown, which, like 70% chance you win, 60% chance you win. I mean, they still get the ball back. So like 60% chance you win the game, versus an incompletion where nothing changes. You throw that ball away. That's a different risk calculation. So I don't think it's comparable.
New York Vikes fan asks, in Green Bay, Cousins was consistently overthrowing or off target on a handful of passes, including some that could be game-altering passes. Is this an issue we should be worried about moving forward? I wanted to ask this because I wanted to couple this with Zen Cupid's question, who asks, it looked like Kirk has struggled with screen passes in general since he got in Minnesota. Even the successful plays seem rocky initially when the ball is when getting the ball to the receiver / running back. Is this actually accurate? And if so, is there a reason or cause for the struggles, and can it be fixed?
That's a pretty good question. I need to evaluate that a little bit more. I haven't noticed that from last year's review of Kirk Cousins. I take a quick look at like passes by direction in Pro Football Focus, and it looks all right. It looks like a little bit above average. So passes behind the line of scrimmage, 18 of 20 to the left, 36 to 39 to the middle of the field, 21 of 22 to the right. Now, some quarterbacks do complete 100% of their passes behind the line of scrimmage. The expected is around 90. So it's, around average. But, that doesn't speak to the question of like ball location and the danger or the risk of overthrows and stuff like that. So it doesn't quite directly answer that question, but I haven't noticed that. So I don't know if he will continue to struggle with screen passes. Plus, the screen design game for the Vikings is different this year. There's going to be more tunnel screens and stuff like that to running backs. So even then, it's going to be kind of different throws for him. So I don't know. But in terms of the overthrows in this game, doesn't seem like a consistent feature of Cousins. I've seen him underthrow passes. I've seen him perfectly throw passes. I don't think he overthrows more often than a normal quarterback. We actually asked him after the game, hey, it looks like most of your misses this game were overthrows. Is there something to that, and why would that be the case? And he was surprised to learn that, which is kind of frustrating, but okay. But he's like, oh, yeah, I didn't know that. I guess I'll check the film. Cool. but it's not a typical issue.
Next question is from Damian Barrett, who asks, if Cousins kicked the football instead of throwing it, how long ago would Zimmer have lost patience with him?
That's really funny.
Before we move on from Kirk Cousins stuff, I wanted to mention Chad Beebe, who we didn't talk about in the review.
Wide receiver 1, right?
Yeah, Chad Beebe had the oddest looking run, but one of the most successful catches I've ever seen. It was
also like Cousins' farviest play ever, right? Yes. Pockets collapsing, he's falling over somebody, and he like tosses it, and it's just like, look, if this isn't complete, it's a fumble. That does not look like a pass. What are you doing? I can't believe you. And then Beebe double clutch. I don't think he catches it right away. I think he double clutches it because of course he does, because that's what he does. And then he just like runs it 60 yards, which actually someone tweeted at me, Beebe got run down from behind and he's our punt returner? Man, shut up, man. He got 60 yards.
I think once you get past 50, all sins are forgiven, okay?
Right. Like,
as long as you keep
if you're concerned about him being a punt returner is like his ability to hold onto the ball, okay, fine. But like, he got run down from behind. Who cares?
Yeah. Anyway, I did want to give credit to BB on that one. JPC asks, was Cousin out of sync often in training camp? Last game felt like he was too risk averse in the first reads, just to take even higher risks later in the play.
No, he did not look out of sync in training camp. He didn't look remarkable, and in 2-minute situations, he looked awful, which big shock. I mean, and that's what he looked like in training camp last year too. Obviously, that's what he looked like during the season last year, and obviously that's what happened in this game. But generally speaking, in terms of offensive performance, he did not look out of sync in training camp. He looked perfectly fit within that offense.
Next question is from Hunter, who asks, could the early game strip sack be used to explain Cousins' extreme discomfort while under pressure for the rest of the game?
Perhaps. Actually, so after the game, I asked Cousins about the fumble thing because he said during the offseason, he looked at all of his fumbles last year and he talked to the analytics department about the nature of the fumbles and like why he's fumbling more often than other quarterbacks. And he comes back to the conclusion that there's no one thing, right? There's no pattern with which to correct the fumbles. Some occurred while he's running. Some occur while he's in the pocket. Some occur while he's in the pocket in the process of throwing. Some occur while he's broken the pocket. Some occur because of center quarterback exchange, which, that's not really super correctable. I mean, you can practice the quarterback exchange. Sometimes some teams need to spend a little bit more time on that. But he said, they came from a bunch of different situations with a bunch of different causes. And that's what he said in the offseason. So I'm like, hey, Kirk, we can call each other by our first names, right? Hey, so you said in the offseason that there was no consistent theme among your fumbles. And so there's not anything really to focus on in terms of correcting it. Has your mind changed? Like, I had no idea how to finish that question. I was like, what now? Like, are you sure? Because he had a couple of fumbles in the Atlanta game, didn't matter. A couple of fumbles in this game. And so he says, well, one occurs because I'm carrying the ball at like my ribs or at my belly button or something at here instead of curling it in against pressure. And another occurs, and he gives a different reason. He's like, so I've got to change my fundamentals on this and make sure it doesn't happen. But he leads the league in fumbles since 2015 when he first earned the starting job. So there's something there. But yeah, he fumbles the ball. They happen a bunch of different ways. It sounds like the common theme is that he's fumbling the ball. Fix it, dude.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to mention, and I feel like I've said this of some version of this over the past 6 years, at least 3 times, probably about 3 different quarterbacks. Okay, but can we get somebody from the Twins to show him how to slide instead of taking the contact?
Because my God, he flew head first. Jesus.
If he doesn't take the contact on that scramble, he doesn't fumble. So can we get somebody in there to teach him how to frickin' slide?
Right. Well, so this still reminds me of that Christian Ponder conversation a while back when people asked Ponder, hey, why are you sliding head first? And he says, it actually reduces the risk of injury, which actually I can believe after seeing what's happened to Teddy. Like the LaMarcus Joyner, like hitting him in the head and stuff like that. Maybe that's the case. But like, okay, health is important. Obviously, I don't want to say it's not. But the sliding reduces fumbles, right? Like, you're a healthy guy. You haven't missed any games. Jesus, you're giving the ball away.
Just ugly. All right. Ben Glazman asks, who would you rather have down 4 points to the Green Bay Packers, Kirk Cousins or Joe Webb?
Well, who's calling the plays?
That's an excellent question.
If it's Brad Childress, 100%. I've got Kirk Cousins back there.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like a good coordinator, Joe Webb, man. Yeah. We know they can't defend the read option. I don't care if it's been 4 years. I don't believe they can defend the read option. Joe Webb would have had a fourth quarter comeback against the Detroit Lions if they had just called that face mask, man.
Mm-hmm. Caleb asks, should we be concerned about Garrett Bradbury? For those of you who haven't been paying attention to PFF, he once again had a ridiculously low-rated pass defense rating.
Yeah, he's the worst-graded center, according to PFF. A lot of film guys not happy with that. I think PFF is closer to accurate than a bunch of the offensive line nerds on Twitter, which, I mean, most of them are like former offensive linemen, so it's like just fun to call them nerds. But yeah, I mean, there's such a focus on his highlight plays, like when he makes remarkable recovery after losing position against Kenny Clark in pass protection, or when he, opens. I mean, his job on that 75-yard touchdown, he did a great job, and he's done a great job. Scoop blocks, getting to the second level, reach blocks. He's done a great job on some of these highlight plays. But even in the running game, if you make a tremendous block on one play and turn a 4-yard gain into a 7-yard gain, and then you give up a tackle for loss for 4 yards, I mean, the difference is like 3 positive yards versus 4 negative yards. But we know, because of the way the down system works in the NFL, 4 negative yards are a lot worse than 3 positive yards are good. Like, it's substantially, like 2nd and 14 is way worse than, 2nd and 10. Like, it's substantial. And so if you can't continue to win blocks as a run blocker, it doesn't matter how good your good run blocks are. If you can't win blocks in pass protection, that's 3 times more important than run blocking. What are you doing? That's important. And he's given up a ton of pressure. Like, I remember after the PFF grades came out, a lot of people are like, well, he only gave up 1 pressure. Why is this pass blocking grade 0? Well, if you give up 1 pressure on 11 dropbacks, you're the worst center in the NFL. That's it. Last year, the worst center in the NFL, which remarkably was not Pat Elflein. He was 2nd worst. Last year, gave up 1 pressure every 13 and a half pass blocking snaps. And the thing is, Bradbury gives up pressure on plays that ended up not counting because of penalty, defensive penalty. And he didn't benefit from he didn't get hurt because of the penalty. So he actually looks worse in pass protection than the final numbers show. And that usually ends up in the PFF grades, even though they don't count. And I actually agree with that process because it's telling you kind of who that player is. And so he ends up actually with a worse grade than that. And now he had an even worse rate of pressure given up. He's number 1 in pressure rate allowed among centers, and he's given up a pressure every 7 snaps. That's twice the worst center in the NFL last year. So he's playing very poorly. Now we can pivot to don't panic. There's a difference between acknowledging, maybe a little bit vociferously, that he's not playing well. I think it's important to figure out if a player is playing well and not just take a look at, 3 or 4 plays here. Because the point of being an offensive lineman is not the highlights. It's the consistency. And if you can't be consistent, you can't be an offensive lineman. So is he playing poorly? Yeah. Is there a reason to panic? I don't think so. I think he'll play a lot better over the course of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if he continues to struggle for the next couple of games. And then, 7 games in, if he continues to be the worst graded center, we'll probably ask some questions. It's a tough position to play. Maybe he'll bounce back next year. Some players do, some players don't. Already, Eric McCoy, Elton Jenkins, both players that I think are great system fits. Not as good a system fit as Garrett Bradbury, but great system fits nevertheless, are playing a lot better right now as rookies. And so somebody else is like, well, what about who he's playing against? Or what about the fact that he's a rookie? No, he's playing poorly for a rookie. If you're the worst player at your position, you're playing poorly for a rookie. The only position where that might remotely not be true is quarterback, because we've seen what's happening with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. We saw what happened with Jared Goff. And I guess Carson Wentz, although he kind of looks like bad right now, which is great. But we've seen a bunch of bad rookies turn into decent players at quarterback. And maybe you can say that at tight end. But generally speaking, if you're playing as the worst at your position, you're bad for a rookie too. Like that's it. What about who he's playing against? He's going to have to play against that quality of player all year, because that's just what the schedule looks like. There's great defensive tackles throughout the NFL. There's great defensive tackles on the schedule. You've got Kenny Clark coming again. You've got Eddie Goldman coming up. You've got Akeem Hicks coming up. You've got Damon Harrison coming up. There's a lot of good ones. Fletcher Cox, I think. So there's a lot. Poona Ford for the Seahawks. So yeah, he doesn't get that latitude. But in terms of projecting who he's going to be, I think he can turn it around. I think he can turn it around this year. I think he might be able to turn it around next year. He was never the best pass blocking center in college football, and he wasn't actually that close. There's a reason PFF had him as a second-round grade, while other people had him as a first-round grade. PFF cares a lot more about what you can do in pass protection than a lot of offensive line evaluators, because run blocking is cooler to evaluate. It's easier to evaluate and it pops off. And so it's very easy to kind of weight them equally, or even weight run blocking a little bit more. But he was an okay pass protector to below average pass protector compared to his competition in college. So it's not necessarily all there, but 2 games, man. He's got a lot of room to turn it around. Now, in terms of evaluating our priors, there's 2 sets of priors we have. We have the fact that he's a first-round pick, which is positive. That means there's a great likelihood of positive regression, and that he's the worst center in the NFL. And how many times does that happen, and then you end up becoming good? Probably not that often. So you've got 2 priors, 2 bad games. That gives us more information than when he had no games, but also first-round pick. So I'd say, generally speaking, he's very likely to improve to become at least an average center with some great highlights. But yeah, don't panic.
Captain asks, who in Green Bay thought Jimmy Graham versus Hunter in pass protection was a good idea, and how do we keep them in a position of power?
I mean, the same person that thought that Kyle Rudolph could shut down Tackerus McKinley, right?
Yeah, probably. Kyle Slaby asked, with the Chargers punter missing 2 kicks against Detroit and the Bears roughing the passer at the end of the game, which NFC North team was gifted the most undeserved win?
Well, I had money on the Chargers, so the Lions.
I got a message at one point about the Lions Chargers game, and I was just dying laughing because it was something along the lines of they managed to score twice and come away with no points. Like,
yes.
Like, I'm sorry, what? It's like, yeah, touchdown called back for holding, touchdown called back for a block, touchdown called back for a shift, defensive PI gets them to the 2, and then they lost a fumble. Like, that's astounding. And then I actually watched it. It's like, I don't understand how that's a thing, but okay.
I feel so bad for Phillip Rivers, man.
I stopped feeling bad for Phil Rivers years ago.
There's only so much sympathy that you can give.
Yeah, I mean, he's got more kids than I do, so I feel sympathy there. But otherwise, like, no. Logan asks, I'm in a league with negative 15 points for missed kicks. Does game theory suggest I pick up the Miami kicker? Absolutely. I have never wholeheartedly endorsed anything on this show more than I do this plan. This is your lock of the week, and look at the size of that lock. It's perfect. Yeah, go for the Miami kicker for the love of all that is good. Take him. Number 2, if Miami is tanking for Tua, aren't they shooting themselves by trading away left tackles and other positions?
Maybe. If we believe that players who struggle in their rookie year can succeed in their second year without necessarily getting traumatized by offensive. So people like to say, remember David Carr for the Texans? He got sacked more than anyone else, and that ruined him. We don't actually know that. He could have just been a bad quarterback, right? But I mean, look at Deshaun Watson. He still doesn't have a team, and he's playing remarkably well. A lot of players didn't have supporting casts the rookie year, and turned into good players despite that. So maybe not, but can you really tank that hard if you're not going to be able to, or can you really shoot yourself in the foot if they're not going to re-sign? Like, that's the issue with like Laramie Tunsil and Minka Fitz. Well, Minka, you get 3 years, but like if they don't re-sign, it's the same thing, right? So you get a bunch of picks. If you're tanking enough, you'll have the first pick regardless of how many other picks. If they've got 4 first-round picks or 5 first-round picks in the next 2 years, so 4 that are not going to be used for Tua, because if they get the top pick, they don't need to use those other picks as ammo. Then you get to trade down. You trade down like 5 spots. You get another first-round pick because, the Steelers are going to pick pretty high in the draft. Then you get to draft your left tackle. Then you get to draft another edge rusher. Then you get to draft a receiver. So you might have a bunch of rookies playing together, and maybe that's not ideal. But I think a rookie with a supporting cast is not necessarily as critical as we think. And then also the other option here is that actually they pick first overall, but they trade that pick away for a bunch of first round picks, and then they draft an entire supporting cast. And then next year they'll trade up for Lawrence or whatever. That's possible too.
Well, it's possible, but this is also an organization that is we're slowly leaning into like historically bad. So
yeah, it's the last time. So last time that happened, it was like the Jacksonville Jaguars, and they still ended up winning like 2 games that year. And the Jaguars were so bad. They were I think as bad as this Miami team. Honestly, like it's hard to imagine, but I think they were.
Yeah. Final question, and we're going to do this question, and then we are going to clip it onto YouTube and just have it for every time that this gets asked to us. So we're doing it. We're doing this year's version of it. It says, this is from Chris. Hey, my brother and I will be coming to Minneapolis this coming Sunday for the game. Just wanted to reach out and see if you guys had any quick recommendations for food and entertainment in the Twin Cities. Staying in downtown. Any ideas? So, Arif, what are your suggestions for food and things?
All right, so if you want Minnesota staples like a Juicy Lucy, there's 3 places that you can go to. Matt's Bar and the 5-8 Club have both claimed to invent the Juicy Lucy. I do like the Juicy Lucy at Matt's Bar, but I think the best ones are found at Blue Door Pub. And there's 3 of those locations around the cities. Also, I've been to the Nook, and their Juicy Lucy is phenomenal. And it ended up winning like best Juicy Lucy in the Twin Cities by like Bon Appetit or whatever, right? So that's a thing you can go to. If you want very Minnesotan ethnic food, there's some Scandinavian places like the Bachelor Farmer and Fika. Both of them are really good. Bachelor Farmer is, I'm not going to say it's pricey, it's sit-down restaurant prices, but it runs on the expensive side of that. And then also very Minnesota ethnic food. You can get Somali food at a place called Safari, or Ethiopian food at a place called the Red Sea. And Kwong has some of the best pho I've ever had in the Twin Cities. So that's great. The Twin Cities are also known for their diners. They've got a bunch of them. Al's Breakfast is very traditional at in Dinkytown near the University of Minnesota campus. It's only got 8 seats, but it's great. I like that Ideal Diner a lot, which has, I think, the best pancakes in the cities. And Al's pancakes are remarkable too. They've won a couple of contests, but I like Ideal Diner a lot. And then Nicolette Diner, you're saying in downtown. Nicolette Diner is downtown. It's open 24 hours. They're really good too. So that's a great place to get a diner. And then if you want to go to where Vikings players have been spotted, they've been spotted at Crave, which is whatever. They've been spotted at Manny's Steakhouse, which is where Vikings take their free agents to in order to woo them. It might be some of the most expensive steaks in the cities, but they're really, really good. Or you can go to Kramer Chick's Deli, where I have seen both Moritz Beringer and Babatunde Ayagbusi. That's because Kramer Chick's Deli is an Eastern European deli that serves Polish, Hungarian, Ukrainian, and other Eastern European foods. I love it. There's a place across the street called Nye's that's more famous for their Polish food. Don't go there. Kramer Chick's is way better.
There was a time when Nyes would have been better, and that was before they tore down the building.
That's fair.
Darn shame. My recommendations are a little bit different. I always suggest the 112 as a ridiculously delicious and surprisingly cheap option. Not cheap.
They've got great steak tartare.
Yes, it is fantastic. I also suggest JD Hoyt's over in the warehouse district. A lot of the time I spent when I was down there was spent in the warehouse district. So admittedly, those two are kind of in the same general area, but really good. JD Hoyt's is fantastic, along with the Monte Carlo about like half a block away. Manny's as well. The Lotus is fantastic Vietnamese food. Always, I'm definitely always one to jump on that, though that's not necessarily in downtown, but it's still worth the travel. And the Newsroom, which might actually be close to your hotel, is really good as well. I really, really enjoyed the meal I got over at the Newsroom in downtown. So definitely worth the shot there. I mean, if you want dinner and a show, the hot dog buffet at at the strip club I had to park at when I went to college was entertaining, but I mean it looked odd to see like 8 college students walking across the street being like, oddly enough, this is the cheapest hot dog in Minneapolis. It did feel a bit like the scene in Parks and Rec when Ron Swanson was talking about, I don't give a crap about the naked women here, but if you get me in front of a breakfast buffet, I'll do some damage. Like it felt a bit like that, but that would be those would be our suggestions to you if you are going to be coming into town to eat. So that'll be it for this extra long edition of Norse Code. Arif, what do you have to plug?
I've got a mailbag up at The Athletic. Check that out. I'm also, like I mentioned, working with an app called Boothcast. Download that. Just type Boothcast into your search, and then you can get alternative commentary for your games. I'm not going to be doing any Boothcasts this week. I did one last week with Seth Galino for the Monday Night Football game. It's great. I really enjoy it because you get access to a bunch of really smart people that are very familiar with the teams that they're covering. So you can do that. But other than that, all my pieces are over at The Athletic. Just did a mailbag where I addressed some of the questions that we talked about in the show and some other ones.
All right, so that is going to be it for this episode. We will be back later in the week to preview the Oakland Raiders game. I believe with Dusty at the helm, he will no longer be on assignment opening up a restaurant. So Dusty will be available for that. So that'll be it for the show. For Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that revenge is a dish best served funky as hell. And we'll see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.